Okay. I call dog.
Nelson Kwaje,
Welcome again.
thank you for having me.
We need to find a name for this weekly segment. Sooner or later we need to.
I thought of a name.
What's the name?
The World Today.
The All Today. That someone already has that name. I'm telling you, whatever it is, if you Google it, there is someone who has it. I don't know what is CNN or maybe South Sudan and the world.
I have that podcast.
Mm.
Yes. You were on it.
That is South Sudan and the world.
Yeah, South Sudan and the world.
That's why I told you there is no idea that you think of that has not been thought of.
Say
We'll find out.
us and the world.
Someone has that, us against the world.
You know, intellectual property is so weird. You just look, everything you find, somebody has just done it.
But I think also that's also what makes the case. I think a lot of people come to me with ideas, especially because I manage seniors. A lot of young people come to me with ideas. And then if they see something similar happening to seniors afterwards, they're just like, oh my God, you stole my idea. I'm just like, it is not, your idea is not that, like, it's not that unique. Like, actually, when you're thinking about something, believe you me, someone's thought of that problem.
Somebody's thought about that.
Yeah.
It's like this AI thing.
Yep.
You know, in technology, many companies are just reflection of other companies.
Yeah.
Like, you look at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. They're just it's just similar things. It's a social media network, like Alibaba, Amazon. It's just one is in U.S., one is there. But what hurts the most for the U.S. AI industry is that the U.S. positioned itself to be a leader of AI and to be basically distance ahead from the rest of the world. That's how they position themselves. And China just comes and says, "Nope, you guys are. We do it cheaper, more efficient," and that's basically creative destruction in capitalism.
I think, but also like, because when you look at the race now, the AI race, this thing started long ago. It's actually during the first Trump administration when they restricted U.S. First of all, they restricted the American company from using anything to do with Huawei. Not American companies only, but like even people who receive at times American funding or American grants or what. They restricted them from using Huawei. And the reasoning was for national security interests. But you see, it's not only national security reasons, but also it's like, what do you call it, protectionist policies. Because they realized, hey, and then the second thing they did this act on chip manufacturing. Like, so they said like, hey, certain products that go into manufacturing semiconductors and other chips and stuff like that might be used for nefarious reasons or whatever it is. They also restricted those parts. But I think the whole idea of this is because when it comes to 5G, Huawei is actually like about 5 to 10 years ahead of everyone in the world. So like Huawei themselves, their technology is like 5G. In terms of 5G, they're like ahead of everyone. So, and I think the US is also trying to kind of prop up their companies, Cisco and the rest, and what to kind of be to be ahead in terms of 5G. I think that's when it started. AI is the latest kind of spanner to be thrown in the box of this. But I think that was the initial kind of like war in that. And you find the EU is kind of caught between this because they also want. They're like, we can use this Chinese product. I mean, but now you have a lot of these concerns that are being raised. To be clear, the national security concerns for the US are not out of thin air. You know what Chinese company did for the headquarters of the African Union. Yeah. And I mean, they gave all the technologies and what, but they're bugging the whole space. So I think it's a very interesting dilemma, but I don't know how soon should we now admit that China is ahead and we just accept it.
I think the issue of China is ahead or US is ahead is a complex issue. One of the things with great superpowers is when you get into the realms of great superpowers, people start to feel espionage more and more. Now everybody believes that this person is spying on me. That's why you had this Russian spy, American spy narrative that the United States, given the chance, will spy on Russia. Russia, given the chance, will spy on the United States. That's the same thing that's happening now, where national security concerns are that even if we treat this as business, these companies can be pressured by their governments to serve the interests of their governments. It's like the issue of the tariffs. If you remembered in the Trump's first administration, Apple was giving a waiver for some of these tariffs because, you know, they went to the Trump administration and they said that we can't compete with Samsung if you do these tariffs because you have tariffs about things coming from China. We're still an American company. If you have tariffs on us, it's going to affect us. But you don't have tariffs on things coming from Korea.
Yeah.
So to admit that China is ahead, I think you have to admit that China is a formidable adversary to the United States. And the Americans understand that more than ever now because what really propelled America ahead in the Cold War was technology. America is the first country to build the nuclear bomb. And after they build the nuclear bomb, they are ahead. Then Russia builds a nuclear bomb. And then the United States announces the space race. Yeah. And then you had Sputnik, where the Russians were the first to go to space.
I think that is what propelled the U.S.
So this is now telling America that you have to wake up and you have to take some strides. And one of the biggest things you're going to see is that the U.S. will change a lot of its immigration policies with some of these, you know, let me call it Indo-China countries, the India, the China, the Koreas, because now you could be a Chinese international student and go to one of the best American schools and you're taking intellectual property. You don't have to be an asset of the Chinese government or work for Chinese intelligence, but you just have to be a Chinese who's a nationalistic and prideful about your country, that you will come back with information about things that are happening. And that's why you see the complaints of the tech industry. Why is the tech industry filled with these Indo-China? And whether you like it or not, Indo-China is now proving to be a legitimate threat to the United States. And when I say Indo-China, I'm talking about that area of India, China, you know, these, let's say the Asian, Southeast Asia, and Korea, where those places, you put in Taiwan, have such strategic economic interests and they're competing. You look at South Korea with Samsung. South Korea is able to compete on levels with Apple.
Yeah.
Now people say Android versus Apple.
iOS, yeah.
As you know, Samsung Galaxy versus iPhone. You go to Japan. Japan is legitimately competing with vehicles. You know, Toyota, those are very popular cars. So look at the type of brands that are there globally. They're there, you know, Honda, Toyota, Hyundai, the list goes on. You look at China in e-vehicles, in finance, in technology, in geopolitics. So you look at India. These places have reached a point where they can compete. And what separates them from the European Union? The European Union is, I call it, a vague union of European countries that's dominated by a few nations. You have Germany. France. Yep. You know, then you have the country, they call it the pigs country. You have Portugal. It was Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. They say these are countries whose they carry a big weight. And the European Union has a central monetary system where Germany tomorrow cannot emerge as a powerhouse in Europe because it's tied down by the euro. So Germany can have such a good economic year, but if Greece is struggling, if
they have
Spain,
to foot the bill for that.
They have to foot the bill. China has its own currency. India has its own currency. South Korea has its own currency. Japan has its own currency. And when they come to the table, they come as nations. Where Germany doesn't come as Germany. Germany's currency is managed by the European Union. But the only thing, even their foreign policy by the European Union. But what these European nations have realized is that even the euro, the EU is is a way to contain the European Union from historical threats, which is European wars. Because that's have been the biggest problem historically. If you look at the 18th and 19th and 20th century, it was just European wars. Now the Union intertwines them so much to prevent a European war, but now it's even inhibiting them from reaching to newer heights.
From reaching to new heights. But also but I think probably one of the advantages also that like countries like China or India will have over the EU is that they have the homogeneous, not cultures, but they can, I mean, forcefully rather. I think you can say that also. Like I think in China is, I think it's almost like enforcing homogeneity to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think probably that's what the cost of such a advancement is, where like the country is being driven towards one direction. That means one direction in terms of the culture, the way people behave, the way people talk, the language, the history, all of it. Yeah, and I think probably that's why China has issues with Tibet. That's why China has issues with the Uyghur. That's why China has issues with Taiwan. Because I think the idea is that, like, hey, that is how progress should look, and that's everyone should kind of face in this direction. And I mean, India, to some extent, is also moving towards that direction. I mean, you look at the policies of the Hindutva policy with Modi now trying to make, I mean, everyone should adopt a certain form of Hindu nationalistic views. I mean, maybe India to a less extent, but China to a very great extent wants to force people to be like that.
I think you make a good point of the issue of homogeneity. And it's something that's plaguing America. America's history starts in 1776. Where in 1776, America is founded by a bunch of settlers. And you call it the United States of America because the settlers of the 13 original colonies, if it's Virginia, if it's any of the places, have different backgrounds. So when America was formed, you had the Quakers, you had the Protestants, you had very different people who came to the United States at the time, were the 13 original colonies. And so the U.S. wasn't the U.S., it was 13 colonies. They decided to say, hey, let's unify and create a nation. Yeah. Okay, what language do we speak? We're going to speak English, the language of our colonizer. Okay, what sort of economic system are we going to have? Well, we're going to take these ideas of
we don't want
liberty.
The king.
Yeah, liberty. We're going to take the ideas of John Locke and the French Revolution of justice, liberty, and equality. Okay, those are French and European values. Okay, what kind of system we're going to have? And you see the influence of the Lockean ideas, and you find this with Thomas Jefferson, who, if you talk about the modern idea of the classical liberal, it comes from the philosophies of John Locke, and you can see the influence of English philosophy and French philosophy.
The Magna Carta.
The Magna Carta, you see these things. So there is no American. What is an American? American is just somebody who's in a territory. Where if you go to France, we speak French, we're this Catholic, we're this religion, we're that. The U.S. had an issue where it wasn't one religion, it wasn't one identity. There was Native Americans, and then there was African slaves.
Yeah.
So since inception of America, you could not say original Americans. American is itself, by its existence, is a melting pot, a diversity. So now when you promote this ultra-American nationalism, for example, you take Donald Trump. Donald Trump's grandparents came from Germany. You know, Marco Rubio.
And this is not too far. This is very
not too
recent.
far. This is somebody's maybe late 1800s.
Yeah.
So even some of these people who are espousing some of these American, values, their parents.
Marco Rubio's dad was a Cuban?
A Cuban. Marco Rubio's a Cuban. Ted Cruz's dad is Cuban. You find all these people who, some people came from England. Some people came from France. Some people came from, all these Americans that you see, they have roots someplace. But the American idea has been there. So that's what China is able to do. And that's something that's frustrating Americans, where they can't push people towards a certain direction. They can't say we're Americans, we're Protestants, we're this. Because historically, when America has attempted to do that, there has been backlash. Where at one point, when John F. Kennedy became president, when he was running for president in 1960, a lot of people refused to vote for him because he's a Catholic.
He's a Catholic and he's Irish.
Right? Yeah. You see those types of things, and you get this from Protestants. You see the same with the issue of Native Americans and slavery. You can't tell Native Americans they're not American. That's why they're called Native Americans. If anything, they're the original Americans. So with China and with Korea and with Japan, one thing that they have is the same language. They look the same identity, the same culture. Therefore, they look at authority differently. And I always say, when people say, okay, well, these countries value authority more than America. No, it's not they value authority. They see authority as more legitimate because authority looks like them.
As if it's I mean, that's what the Chinese usually call them, as if it has a mandate from heaven.
Yes. And these are just the authorities. And these authority figures are there, and they're just told, okay, this is your leader, President Xi or Ho Chi Minh. And you can even find this during the Vietnam War, where a lot of people, the issue of Vietnam War wasn't necessarily communism versus capitalism. It was more Ho Chi Minh was so powerful because he started to touch into the nationalism. That's why he was able to unite Vietnam. You had the North and South Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh Chao was more like, we're, when the French were kicked out of Vietnam, and there was a war in Bien. It's called, you can look this up. There's a battle where the Vietnamese defeated the French. That created the ultranationalism. So the point I make now is, what's giving American identity crisis is that, what is the American identity? There is no American identity. It's not white Americans, because, okay, when America was incepted, there were black slaves there. They're also American there. But if you go to the inception, you say, okay, you have black Americans who've been in the United States historically through their bloodline more than Trump, more than Rubio. They're more American than these guys. And that's why Americans are having challenge competing sometimes.
But I think what is interesting is that, like, and I think that is what it's interesting, is that I think a lot of white Americans, probably grandparents, came to the U.S. I think for them, they see their lineage not towards the German heritage that they left behind. They see their lineage as the founding fathers who also came from there.
Yeah.
So they don't. I think it's a very interesting. Identity is a very fluid and very abstracted idea.
It's very abstract, because America is a cultural identity.
Yes.
Whereas being German or French is an ethnic identity.
It's an ethnic identity.
Where you could say, basically, like you find these Senegalese who go to France, they get citizenship. You're like, oh, where are you from? France? No, you're not. Where are you really from? Oh, I'm from, Wolof.
Yeah.
America's a cultural identity. That's why you can have people like Rubio, people like Obama, people like, people who look.
Yeah, because even someone like Obama, and I think that's something brought a lot of contentions in when he was running, is that, like, to what extent can Obama identify with slavery? Because his dad is
Kenyan.
Is Kenyan. And not Kenyan from, like, yeah, but he can still tie himself to the black struggle and the slavery and all that. And I think, and that is accepted.
That is accepted. And that's why you get the culture idea of America. And that's where you get the belief of a lot of black Americans who are descendants of slaves. And I have to mention that when you say black Americans who are descendants of slaves, not black Americans who are people like us who went to the U.S., because it's a different idea. Because you see it in the United States, you'll find somebody who has a Nigerian name, but it's like, I'm a third generation and black, and they're talking about issues facing black Americans. Like, you go to Nigeria every year, you go to Kenya every year, you go to Jamaica every year, right?
Yeah,
there's a certain thing, and that's where, with America, the struggle of the black slave population is a constant identity crisis, because they fight for a struggle. They fail to fit in since the inception of this country. They've been a part of the building of this country. But until now, they still don't feel as if they're included in what this country is.
But I think, but also to some extent that now pities them. There are some people now that you see these discussions on Twitter where, like, even the whole idea of blackness, and that's now, like, Africans who are in the U.S., not African Americans the way it's defined, Africans who are now Americans, who went to the U.S. either as students or whatever, who migrated to America. The black Americans also don't vibe with them like that. They feel like as if you came late into the party and you want to chip into my cookies. Yeah. I don't know. That's a very simplistic way of putting it. It's
justified.
Yeah.
Because, okay, the term African American was actually coined by Jesse Jackson.
Oh, just the Olympian.
It started in the 90s.
No, not that Jesse Jackson.
And Jesse Jackson, the
civil rights
activist.
Yeah.
So
that is Jesse Owens, I think. So.
Yeah, that's Jesse Owens. So in the 1980s and 70s and 80s, when he started to become active, he said, "Okay, we need a solidarity movement between the blacks in America and the blacks there. So we're not American or not Black Americans. We're African Americans." Usually, during the Malcolm X, he referred to them as the so-called American Negro.
Yes.
And that term is much more, to me, a better description. Even Martin Luther King talks about the Negro.
The Negro problem.
The Negro problem.
Yeah.
Malcolm X calls it the so-called American Negro. Why? Because the term Negro he's referring to basically descendants of slaves and people who have historically been enslaved, oppressed, marginalized. And after they were given so-called freedom, now they're told you're just a citizen. Now they're facing discrimination and segregation and Jim Crow. So people who are descendants of the so-called American Negro are justified to see somebody who, like me or you, they're getting opportunities, getting scholarships, getting grants on the name of African Americans. Where now you should even ask the question: if I were to apply for a scholarship, okay, what generation am I of slave? If I get an opportunity, and it's also affirmative action where these ideas were intended to remedy a wrong. That's the idea of affirmative action. Even I think affirmative action is the way to do this.
I think to argue against that, someone who is, and that's what a lot of people say, like someone who is black or who looks, I mean black in a sense of who looks like me or who look any shade of black. When you're in the US, the white system of oppression has no time to distinguish how they should treat you.
Exactly.
So to some extent, the Africans who are in the US can say like, hey, the struggle that we're facing right now, irrespective of how we ended up here, I'm still getting racially profiled. I still get stopped by the police. People still, I don't know, you walk on the street, someone changes the lane or what, or people hold their pass a bit tight. I don't know, like some of the stuff that people face.
But then that's why you have to look at the issue when people say institutional racism.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation about this. When I was in college, it was always things happening like this, where a lot of the times you'd have discussions with, like for the sake of this, I'll just say people, American Negroes.
American, yeah.
Where somebody mentioned the point where you guys have your countries at the end of the day. You can go to your country. If America's not working right for you, you can always go back to your country, live there. You live in your country. You have an identity. You have a culture where the idea of the marginalization and the victimization of, the American Negro is the loss of identity, the loss of culture, and the loss of value. So now they don't have identity. Their name is John Smith. Why your name Smith? Like Malcolm X is okay because my slave owner is Smith.
It's Smith, yeah.
But me, my name is Colin Yaka Call. Why? Oh, my name is Akol.
I think that's what James Baldwin also says.
Yeah, he talks about this. Yeah. My name means something in my tribe. If it's in Dinka or Nuer and Bari or Igbo, whatever you name the identity. Oh, I have a home village. But these people were taken from their roots and they've lost their identity. So they're forced to live in this institution of America. And this institution of America is the one who basically enslaved and oppressed them. So now that they're getting some of these rights and they see somebody who doesn't have that same institutional challenge or the psychological challenge where, okay, can you relate to somebody? For example, you have the movement of a lot of black Americans wanting to have new names, change their name, do these things. You can't relate to that. Or you speak your language to somebody, your mother language. It's not a problem. You don't have any identity issue. But that's one of the reasons that identity existed. That's why the institutional racism, you say institutional racism, where the after effects of this thing continues to wear on.
Do you think the lack of a homogeneous movement among the black Americans or what you call like the descendants of the slaves also contributed to that? Because at the end, to some extent, you can coalesce around a certain identity and say, now this is our identity and we are going with it. I mean, like, look at the identity like Hispanic, which is, I can say it's made up to some extent, but it lumps a lot of people and makes them have a cause, whether it lumps them in or specific
Hispanics
thing.
have a country. That's what I'm saying. Like countries where you see it, Haitians, Jamaicans, people from Barbados, there's that, we're from this country, that's our unity. You see Jamaicans, they have that pride, they created that culture. But black Americans, one of the biggest things is that they didn't have that ability where you can say, okay, just like Hispanics. Okay, Hispanics, you can find Hispanics from Mexico, from Honduras, from El Salvador, from Panama, from Costa Rica, Colombia. But they also have black population there. But it's like you find somebody black, like, oh, I'm black Brazilian, I'm black from Argentina, or I'm black from here. And that's a whole nother discussion about blacks.
So now when you see black Americans on Twitter saying like, oh, what is this lady's called, this South African musician, what's her name? Tyler. So she's a South African Grammy award winning.
Yeah, she won the Grammy.
Yeah. When she's like, I think she showed up in the US and she's like, hey guys, I'm colored. I'm not black.
Yeah.
And this black Americans, they're like, hey, look, that's an offensive term. You are black. You're coming here. You're winning the BET and all these things. You're riding on the success of black culture that people have already created a market for.
But part of that, but another thing where to counter that is that as much as you can, their claims of their frustrations to some extent to me are justified.
Yeah.
I don't think there's no reason for us to be antagonistic towards each other.
Yeah.
On one side, it's not fair for Africans, let me just say indigenous Africans, who know their roots, know their countries, know their identity, to try to look down and disfavorable on, Black Americans, or like Malcolm X called so-called American Negroes. In the same way, when these people come, it's that global Black cultural identity that's allowed these things to flourish. That's allowed us. That's why people enjoy Bob Marley. Bob Marley, he's a Jamaican. People love him. That's why people enjoy these entertainers. People enjoy Afrobeats. Afrobeats become very popular. But can you say the same thing if Jay-Z were to go, when Jay-Z goes to Nigeria or Beyonce and they make music, can you say, no, you're trying to benefit from the African population? By the end of the day, this is a collaboration of finding way to really find a way to get the global Black struggle to unify. So it's really not fair to fight each other in that sense. Okay, this person comes from South Africa. Maybe the word colored is better. Like I said, the terms are different. Yes. You can say Negro, colored, Black. You can say whatever it is. And it's just not good to now get to the point of thinking that, okay, this is a cultural appropriation, this is whatever, because people benefit from both. Yeah. The reason you have an Afrobeats category is because of the collaboration. And Afrobeats has helped a lot of entertainers in the U.S.
Now
to come to Africa. Now you see them coming to. They're in Nairobi. They're in Addis. They go all over Africa. They go to South Africa, and they're blossoming.
Do you think? But also, like, I think there's something that you can attest to it because you grew up in the U.S. to some extent. I think over the years, the word African started becoming positive. It wasn't like that in the U.S. back in the African was associated with a lot of you call it primitive word, like hunger.
Yes.
I think probably you had a front seat into kind of seeing that shift. Yeah, because now African is associated with Afrobeats, with originality, with there is a whole shift towards that wasn't there before. Yeah, and I mean, yeah. And I think that also probably helped a lot of people. I mean, maybe people who have African descent in the US, but it also helped a lot of people in Africa to now feel that pride and feel that global recognition. Yeah, I don't know what's your thought on that.
I think my thought is that now people are, because in American education they don't teach about Africa. So you can't blame somebody who grew up in the US. They may be Black because they don't even teach Black history. So how do you expect that person to know your country or to know this? And the perception and the stereotype that they have of Africa is going to be a stereotype that they've gotten from the media, from what they're told. I think it's a positive step that Africa is being respected. People want to come to Africa. People are going to Senegal. People are going to Kenya. People are going to Nigeria, Angola, etc. People want to touch their roots. People are trying to figure out where they're from. And it's good for all of us as Africans. And I think we need to embrace our African identities, embrace our culture, our language, our identities. They're so vast, but it's also good for our conscience to feel as if we belong to something. We have still a culture and a historical identity that we need to cultivate and grow.
I think there is no place that you can feel that more than Ghana. When I went to Ghana, I've never seen that level of Blackness and pride anywhere else. Because remember, I grew up in Khartoum, where it's very hard. It's very hard to even see an African or Black shop owner, let alone people but you go to when I went to Ghana, it's just like, oh my God, this is like the mecca of Blackness. Everyone is it's rich in culture. People are putting the kente, the Black stars. And I had the trip to Cape Coast, where I went and saw the Cape Coast Castle, where there was the slave ship were kind of taking slaves from, or would-be slaves rather, or slaves by then, who are being sold through the ships. And you go and you see the dungeons and all of this, and someone is telling you, hey, this is the history, that's what's happened, and stuff like that. And when you see the castle, this is not something from the Roman era. This is a very, very recent history. Yeah, I think, I don't know when was the last slave ship. I think in the 1800s or something like that. Yeah. This, this is not if you were living in the 40s, you'll most likely meet people whose parents were slaves in the US. Yeah. So I mean, you see those things and just were like, oh my God, that is something that anyone who witness, it changes your perspective. Definitely coming back from Ghana, I was just like, oh, this is, I feel way different about issues. And also at times you also feel, because at times you can be indifferent towards injustices of people just because you didn't have an experience of it, or you did not have, or you don't know to what extent that to what extent the experience had impacted their current livelihood. But I think once you get experience, you're like, oh my God, this thing was bad, and I think I understand.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we have to really be sensitive to people's experiences, and you have to really understand what people are going through. And part of it isn't to just neglect it and say, okay, it's in the past, it's done. It's to acknowledge how bad it is, but also see ways to prevent some things. Because we're at a phase as humanity where we're rejecting this idea of brutality, destruction. We believe that every human being has value and has rights. That's why the idea of human rights is that we don't want countries and empires going to just slaughtering people. It's unacceptable because there's a humanity. And now that's why when you see a picture of a kid, you think that could be my child, my brother, my mom, my father, my nephew, etc. They see it like that. So it's good to be sensitive to it. And I think as me, where I was able to bridge the gap, where I'm living now in Africa, I grew up in the United States. I just don't feel good when I see the clash. And I'm like, there's no reason for the clash. The Africans and then the Black Americans. I'm like, there's no reason for all this.
No, sometimes when these guys insult Africans, I also feel
YouTube, I just feel so bad. And I'm like when I see an African insult a Black American, I feel bad because I'm like, that's a stereotype that you've been told. Yeah. It's not even how you feel. It's just what you've been told by the media. And then when I see a Black American insult an African, I'm like, why? That's also mostly just stereotypes. Yeah. But there's a way for people to work together. There's a way for people to embrace that identity and to just acknowledge that we all have a common struggle. When they were in the U.S. being enslaved and oppressed, we were colonized by these people. We also had slavery. We also had oppression in our places. And it's good to share that history to understand each other, because when you talk to somebody, don't try to overlook their struggle or what they went through. Even if they're telling you what they went through and you find it as offensive or you think it's sad, acknowledge it. Just learn that this is what they went through. These are some of their challenges. It's like when somebody talks about facing racism, they're like, oh, no, I've never faced racism. It's like, well, that's good, but people have faced racism. People have faced discrimination. People have been victims of it. And their stories and their struggles are just as valid. And just because you didn't face it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Doesn't mean that this doesn't
So you experience by itself. And I think I see the same here, like in South Sudan. When I meet, both you and I, we can say we're probably relatively privileged South Sudanese based on our education, our access to networking. And that's why when I see South Sudanese, it's kind of there's a good of it that is positive. South Sudan is saying this is the South Sudan you don't see on the media. Look at this. We're enjoying the cars, money. This is a club. This is a nice hotel. And I was just like, of course, this is South Sudanese who don't see in the media, but you also need to be granted. Your experience is not the most representative South Sudanese experience.
Exactly.
Yeah, like people are really going through stuff. Yeah. It's and I have had. Maybe I have the privilege of me being at a very close proximity to both sides, and I just see that. I know that's not the experience. Some people here, a lot of people even don't have money to buy simple bread or anything, or even at times take public transport. One can easily be wrapped around your own life and make it and use it as a lens to both see the world and also want people to see the world through it. And I think it's the wrong way of projecting.
It's the wrong way, but I think it's like a counter narrative thing where it's like you have the same thing in the U.S. where you have people oh, you don't see Black lawyers, Black doctors, etc. They only show the negative. I'm like, yeah, but we need a balance. Same thing here. We have to accept that the media has a really anti-African, anti-Black agenda, where they won't come to Juba and say, oh, Juba's okay. It's like when I go to US, people say, how is it safe? I'm like, what do you mean? It's like sometimes I'll be in the gym running or exercising. Somebody called me, is Juba safe? I'm like, what do you mean? What happened? What's going on? He's like, I'm here exercising right now. I was like, what? There's a gym there. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you think I do? It's like, oh, you guys have internet? You guys are chased by lions. that's a stereotype that we've been told, that Africa is this wasteland, this place of poverty and disaster and despair. But on the other side is we have to acknowledge the realities of people's experiences. On one side, I tell people, your experience, own it and live it. If you were privileged, accept your privilege. It's not a problem. You know, there's people who maybe during the time of the war in Sudan didn't go to a refugee camp. Maybe their parents went to Europe, were teachers, they're third generation, they got education, they didn't live in poverty. But the same way, it doesn't take away from the person who was a refugee, who went to Kakuma, who had to trek to go to refugee camps and made himself something. The same thing when you're here in Juba. Don't think because you're doing well in your business, you bought a new car, you finish your business, you finish your building, you're trying to change the narrative. There's also somebody out there who's living in Unimis, who's eating who's eating UN-sponsored meals, who doesn't have anything to eat, who's lost family members. It's like, it's a sensitivity to struggle where don't look at, you know, when there's a conflict, maybe you didn't lose a family member, but somebody maybe lost all their family. So I think both of those narratives are also important to acknowledge that it's not as bad as it is, but on the flip side, it's not as good as we make it out to be.
No, definitely. I think, and I think, but I see that lens. It's a byproduct of experience and travel, because I realize like the more you travel, the more you have. I mean, it doesn't come naturally. You can even travel and just become arrogant, and you become an Instagram douchebag. But I think the idea is that the more you travel, the more you kind of also get to appreciate, because experience affords you kindness. The more experience you are, the more kind you are, because you understand, I know where you come from. Like, I understand that. I understand these feelings. I understand what led to it. I understand 1, 2, 3. And I think for me, that's even happened to me with Sudanese. Because of growing up in Sudan, the northern Sudanese, I have experienced all kind of insults from northern Sudanese and whatever, and its stigmatization, all that. So until recently, until a few years back, I harbored a lot of animosity towards northern Sudanese. But then after some time, when I traveled and actually specifically I had this experience, what changed my mind. In 2019, I traveled to Khartoum, and then I went to Port Sudan by road. And then we stopped in this place, Sawakin. It's I traveled to Eastern Sudan. So like we stopped in this place, and it's just like we stopped from the bus and I see these Bija tribes of Eastern Sudan. And I've never seen that level of like depravity. I see these Bija men and walking with kids and this their clothes. I think probably they washed it last in like few weeks. maybe the clothes like took like a month without being washed. There's no hospital. There is a lot of these people that you're meeting, most likely they have not seen even a government document with their name on it. No hospital, no school, nothing. Then I was just like, oh my God, like this man here is so deprived, but also like he's Muslim, he's Sudanese, and I probably like maybe that's what conflict does. It makes you look into your struggles as if it's the only struggle that exists within a country.
And neglect other people's
And neglect other, and I mean, rightfully so. Then I was just like, oh my God, like, you know what? Let me look at this Northern Sudanese. What is going on with them? And I just kind of like, I think I had a more nuanced view. Even the Sudanese who are privileged, I open the space in my heart to afford and understand why they think that, why they think Bashir is okay, why they think the whole of that time everything was fine. Because I was just like, oh my God, these guys saw a system that worked for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The system worked for them.
Yeah, these guys saw a system that works for them. And I think from that lens, they didn't say anything wrong with it. And to some extent, that system also ensured that all those atrocities are very far. They don't see it. And I think it's just like, oh, like, you know what? Yeah. And when the Sudan war happened, I was just like, oh my God, this is so bad. This is so bad. I don't think anyone in this modern kind of society should be undergoing that level, irrespective of their background.
You know, I'll say two things. Number one, we don't recognize how lucky. I always tell people luck plays a big role. I mean, if you're religious, I'll say God will bless you. God gives you opportunity to be thankful for God. But overall luck. There was a scene in Hotel Rwanda where the guy was talking with the main character, and he told him, he's like, you know what they'll do in America? And he's taking the pictures of the scenes of what's happening. And he says, we're going to air this on 6 p.m. People are going to say, wow, that's so sad. And then go back to eating their dinner because it's just far away. Just change the channel. And I think in our mind sometimes we think, if I just change the channel or the person begging me, I just drive up front of it, it's done. But we also acknowledge that some of these people, their struggles are real. And if we don't, if you're so privileged that you don't have the ability to sympathize with them, that's a blessing.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't know what it's like, to struggle. Or, some people, people comment like, oh, what is it like for, if you're broke, just get a job. It's like, how many people are trying to get jobs? And it's easy to say because like, oh, well, I have somebody who can get me a job, who can help me. I get opportunities. You probably have those people. That's why part of it being in a network of people, you get that help. But a lot of the people are struggling. And when you try to think that you have got it in life because you think you're smarter, you think you're wiser, that's not the case. You were just blessed with better opportunities. And those opportunities doesn't equate to you being a more intelligent and successful person. It equates to you being somebody who had better opportunities than these people. Because the measure of success is how the person who makes the most of their opportunities is successful.
Yeah.
Meaning
Yes.
If the best that you can be with your opportunity is basically a doctor in South Sudan, working at Queens, but you've made the most of your opportunity, you're successful. But if you're somebody who's been privileged and blessed with opportunities in their life, but didn't live up to it, you failed. So we also acknowledge that make the most of what you have. Don't look at other people's life. Live your life. If your life affords you privilege, take advantage of those privilege. If you have people who can sponsor you for education, take care of you for your health, it's okay. It's a privilege. But if you feel as if that you may have to rely on others or you have to rely on other means, do what you have to do. I mean, it may take you longer to get it done, but you'll get it done. But focus on your path.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think just focusing on your path and trying to make the best out of it. One of the points also you mentioned, which is really echoes something is that like the people who are struggling, I think some of us, we can afford not to think about people's struggles, but people who are struggling, they don't have the luxury of not thinking about the struggle. And I think I brought this out a lot of times when we have discussion around feminism, and someone says like, hey, this child marriage thing and these issues with domestic violence and what. Oh, why are you guys disturbing us? It's like, you as a man who is whatever, you have the luxury of not thinking about those issues because they are not at your doorsteps. But I think people women who are undergoing some of these struggles, they don't have the luxury of not thinking about it because it's at their doorsteps all the time. Mm-hmm. You can take few seconds and then forget about it, but it's not like that on the other side.
You can't change the channel.
Yep, you can't change the channel.
Because to some people, it's an ongoing movie, and for you just change the channel because you don't want to see that movie. And you keep your mind.
I think we'll end it here.
All right, thank you so much.
We'll catch up next week, and then maybe a different topic and a different vibe.
Good discussion.
Thanks.
All right.
Yep.